worked on it for so long. And that's Radha's story. And I have so many pages of Radha and her future story and what's going to happen to her 20 years from now and so on. And I was very curious about what would happen if her baby came to find her after all of those years. And, you know, how is that going to make Radha feel as a mother of another two little girls and a husband who has no idea that she had a child when she was 14 years old. So I said I could write that story. And my agent said, go, write me 20 pages. I said, I'm traveling. I don't have time to write 20 pages for you. And she said, well, just write me up a couple of something. And so I wrote, I wrote 3 paragraphs. I mean, I basically just on a flight just went and then just sent it off to her. And she sent it off to HarperCollins, and HarperCollins gave us a 3rd book contract. So that's how the trilogy came about, you guys. It wasn't some mastermind on my part, like, oh, I'm going to write a series and it's going to be about this, this, and this. It just came about because that's how it happened. And so then finally, when The Perfumist of Paris is done, and by the way, you guys, I do not write my titles. I said to my editors, write all my titles. And I said to my editor, I go, is perfumist even a word? Like, I'm not finding it in Webster's. And they go, shh, don't worry about it. So after I'm done with The Perfumist of Paris, I start working, I go back to 6 Days in Bombay. So now this is where we are. Okay, so in 1913, a little baby girl was born to Umrao Singh, who was a creative dilettante and a wealthy man. He didn't really have to work, and so he didn't. And to his wife, Marie Antoinette, who was a Hungarian opera singer. So the little girl in One More Year was followed by, this is them, was followed by a younger sister, Indra. So here is the whole family here, very handsome family. Both Amrita and her sister Indra grew up wanting for nothing. They went to private schools, they had private tutors, they traveled all over Europe, they went to India whenever the family, you know, went to India. Amrita loved to dress up in her mother's opera clothes and have lots of pictures taken, and she always conscripted Indra into doing the same kind of thing that she was doing. So Amrita, as a girl, was very outspoken, very bold, not at all shy, just told everybody what she thought of them, what she thought of what she was doing, and was never, like a wallflower. By the age of 16, she had become so proficient at painting because her mother had been taking her to private tutors in Paris and in Florence, that she had a whole body of work that she could show at any exhibition. And when she ran out of subject matter because classes were over, or they were vacationing somewhere and she wanted to paint, she started using her friends and a lot of self-portraits. This is her friend Boris, who is in the painting Man with 3 Apples that I actually used in the 6 Days in Bombay. And then these are 2 self-portraits by her, about her. She was, as I said, not shy about using herself as the subject matter, with and without clothes. She was not at all shy about painting herself in the nude. Okay, so this is Amrita in the nude. This is her interpretation of Gauguin's Tahitian models. Remember those? So this is her painting in that style. This is her painting in the style of Cézanne's still lifes with apples and oranges. And this is her in the style of Modigliani, who had very elongated figures, elongated faces, and so on. And so like every good painter, what she's doing is she's emulating the greats and trying to learn from them. So she developed this style of kind of avant-garde / impressionistic painting, which was amazing for her young years. At the age of 19, she had been awarded a place in the Grand Salon of Paris, which is something that artists would die to be a part of. And she was invited because of this particular painting that she did called Young Girls. And this is her sister Indra with the bowl of cherries, and a friend of hers over here with the comb and nothing on top. So Amrita was as comfortable in India as she was in Europe. So as she grew, she started wearing these beautiful saris. She loved the big jewelry, Indian jewelry, and she loved her, red lipstick. And now you see why I am so fascinated by Amrita. Uh, but she was just as comfortable in the latest Paris fashions and had the money to buy them. And then just as comfortable being in a theatrical production in Shimla. There's a place called Gaiety Theatre, and it was set up by the British because Shimla was their summer home. It was much cooler up in the hills of the Himalayas than it was in Rajasthan or in the middle of India. So they would often go up to Shimla. And she loved to be in the productions, and she would get dressed up for those kinds of things. She did a lot. She was an exhibitionist in more ways than one. So this is her exhibition in the background of a whole lot of female nudes at a time when women are not painting nudes at all. Like it's just not considered, okay for women to be painting nudes, although it's always been okay for men to be painting any kind of nude. But that is her right there, flirting with this guy and dancing because she loved to do that. Amrita liked to seduce both men and women. And she did it because she could. That's what she told her mom. She's like, I am bold enough that, when I approach people and I want this to happen, it happens. Her mother was scandalized. Okay, so Amrita also found a good place for herself in India. Whenever she was in India, she found that her painting really stood out amidst the Mughal paintings with the emperors and subjects, and the paintings with gods and goddesses. She's bursting on the scene with this vibrancy and brushwork that is all over the place, and colors that are, saturated and really lively. Whereas everything else, as you can see, is more static that was happening in India. By 1937, she was painting exclusively in India, and she went to the south of India, where she really fell in love with the village, the people in the villages and what they were up to, and the women of the villages who had such a hard life. They're painting their mud huts with cow dung, applying more cow dung for the coming winter months. They are drawing water from wells. They are getting ready to be wed, to people they've never met before. So, she just considered their lives really hard. This particular painting is called Villagers Going to Market. And as you can see, she used real villagers as her subject matter. So that's actually a tableau of people that she's painting from. She was so outspoken that once she really learned about the plight of Indians versus the British Raj, she opted to be on the side of Indians and really thought that India deserved her independence. Whereas her family was actually more aligned with the British Raj, because if you were wealthy at that time, no matter where you were from, you were more likely to be aligned with the British Raj. So by 1938, her mother had enough, and Marie Antoinette said, listen, we need to get you married, because if you don't marry, then there's all those scandals of you betting men and women and married men, and it's just anything that moves. So we really need to put a stop to all of that. Would you just get married? Now, of course, Marie Antoinette is thinking, I want her to marry a Raja. I want her to marry a Nawab or an industrialist or somebody from our own socioeconomic group. No, you know what Amrita does? She marries her first cousin, Victor, in Hungary. And of course, that scandalizes her mother even further, because this was not one of her favorite relatives. And also, Victor had studied medicine, but had never actually practiced medicine. He was kind of a ne'er-do-well. But, Amrita didn't listen. She's just painting all the time. And she's painting. This is also one of the paintings that I talk about. This is called Three Girls, but I called it something else in the book. And this is another one of her nudes. And then this is her friend Sumer, who I think she does a beautiful job, Amrita does, of painting brown skin. A lot of people weren't painting brown skin at that time. So how do you paint it? What kind of colors do you use to portray brown skin. This is where I think she found Gauguin to be so interesting, and his colors of the Tahitian women so interesting. But in 1941, Amrita showed up at a hospital in Lahore. Lahore used to be part of India. And after partition, after 1947, it became part of Pakistan. But at that time, it was still part of India, and she had a studio there, and she was painting. Victor took her to the hospital, and Amrita slipped into a coma within 2 days and died. She was only 28 years old. So when that happened, there's something that happens, I think, with women in particular, and I just started looking into why she has gone off the radar. And I think it's because female artists have generally been ignored. We have had a lot of wonderful female artists over time, but we don't know their names because only the male artists ever make it into the history books. And then what would happen oftentimes is that male artists would be threatened by a female artist who was really good and getting a lot of accolades, and they would start lobbying these sexual misconduct allegations. Oh, she's a prostitute, she's this, she's that. And you guys know that from the Perfumist of Paris, because in that, Victorine Meurent, who was the model for Manet and a painter in her own right, she gets labeled as a prostitute because of the painting that she was in, Olympia. And Manet doesn't discourage that. None of the other artists who used her as a model discouraged that. And so she really faded because nobody wanted to buy work from a prostitute. Sometimes the female painters were from poorer families, or in the case of African Americans, they were often slaves. And so they get forgotten, because the poor do get forgotten in our society. And then the last thing that would happen sometimes is people would say, oh, she can't be that good because a man must have helped her. That's probably how it happened. So then I thought, okay, if I have never heard of her, let me see what I can do to write a story that fictionalizes her life. How can I get other people to know about her and not forget her? Okay, so I thought, where do I start? So these are the questions we authors have to ask ourselves. At what point do I start this story? Do I start from Amrita's birth, or do I start somewhere in the middle? Do I start when she gets her first accolades? What do I do? And I decided, why don't I start with her death? Because that death at her age of 28 has never been explained. You can do all this research. There's speculation. Maybe she died of a miscarriage. Maybe she died of a botched abortion. And Marie Antoinette always claimed that maybe Victor gave her that abortion because, he knew about medical practices, but he had never practiced before. And also, Amrita had a couple of abortions. And at a time when, it wasn't safe for women to do that. Maybe there was some kind of gastrointestinal issue that she had going on for a while and nobody had figured it out. So there's all of this speculation, but there's no clear answer. So I thought, why don't I start at her death? And at her death, we are looking at all of the body of work and the accolades that she has earned up to date. And we are looking at it from maybe the way I'm looking at her. I'm looking at her as somebody who is so accomplished, and so at such a young age, how she is able to be so present and forthright about her work and defend her work and so on. And so I thought, well, who would be looking at her from that point of view? Because this is the other question that we have to ask as authors. What point of view am I going to use? Am I using, do you remember in Lovely Bones, it is told from the perspective of the actual dead girl? So am I going to write from that perspective? Am I going to write from the perspective of somebody looking at Amrita the way I'm looking at her? Or are we going to make this like a three-way conversation with several different people weighing in? And I decided ultimately I wanted to look at it from the point of view of the nurse who is taking care of her in her last 6 days at the hospital. Now, yes, the real Amrita was only alive for 2 days, but I thought, how many days does it take for two people to bond if there's a nurse and a patient, and the patient is, letting the nurse do all of these very intimate things that, nurses have to do to patients. And I thought 2 days wouldn't be enough. And then I thought maybe 3 days, maybe, oh, what about 4 days? What about 5? And I settled on 6 days. So that is how arbitrary titles are sometimes, you guys. I told you that my publisher always selects my titles, and that's because I got off to a really bad start with the henna artist. I wanted it to be called The Enemy of the Crocodile. And yeah, it was a terrible title. But I just thought, oh, it sounds so intriguing. Like, oh, who's the enemy? Who's the crocodile? And so my publisher said, why? And I said, well, because, there is a wonderful proverb in the book. And the reason I have so many proverbs in the book always is because there was a time in India, and I've been writing, before like 1970s or so. There was a time when most of that generation spoke in proverbs. In order to make a point, they would speak in a proverb. And there is a proverb that goes like this: only a fool remains in the water and stays an enemy of the crocodile, right? And so Lakshmi is trying really hard not to become an enemy of Parvati, who is, of course, our crocodile. And so she is trying to stay in the water, but not become an enemy. And I said, that's why. So my publisher said, okay, are you going to stand next to every bookshelf and explain that to people when they come by? So they said, you know what, why don't we just call it the henna artist, if that's all right with you? So I said, okay. So then ever since then, I just let them, title all of my books. Okay, so now we were at 6 Days in Bombay. So here we have two main characters of the book. We have the actual painter patient, who is modeled after Amrita. I changed a lot of details about her so that it's not exactly Amrita, because I'm not writing a biography. I'm just writing a fictitious account of how this woman may have died. And then I have the nurse. And one of the things I do when I first start writing is I have these characters in my head. They just come to me unbidden, and I have ideas on what they look like. Then I scour the internet to see if I can find a face that's similar. And yes, I found a young Emma Thompson, and she just happened to have a nurse's cap on. And so when you are reading 6 Days in Bombay and you come across Sona the nurse, this is whom I think you should be thinking of, because she has that kind of skepticism, she has that kind of like, I'm not sure I believe you, kind of look about her. Because these two women are very, very different. They're both in their 20s, but they're very different from one another. So the patient is very outgoing, outspoken, has lived everywhere, has done everything, has had a lot of experiences in her life. And the nurse has not. The nurse has lived a very sheltered life. She is much quieter. She has not had the kind of experiences that the painter has had. And so there is a lot of skepticism, and she's looking askance at the painter in a way that says, I am really impressed by you, but should I be? I'm not sure. And so that's kind of how the two of them get started. This is how they get to know one another while the painter is in the hospital. Now, this is not a spoiler, but the painter's going to die, right? Just like Amrita died. And so she's going to die, but not before she leaves 4 paintings in the nurse's care. And with it, a cryptic note that says, you need to deliver these paintings to my former friends and lovers in Europe. You need to go to Prague. You need to go to Paris. You need to go to Florence. And our nurse, now keep in mind, she's going to go on this journey, but how does somebody in 1937, which is when this novel takes place, it's the interwar period, because I don't want either war to take away from the story or from this particular painter. So how does one, without an iPhone, without the internet, without any of those things, how is she going to find these people? It's not like the patient gave her an address book and said, here are all my friends. She just talked about them. And then at the very end, when she died, it was a shock to the nurse, but with this note that says, deliver these. And she's like, oh my God, what, where, how? So I'm going to, part of what I had to do, and I'm going to leave you to find this out also, is how does the nurse find these various people that she's supposed to give these paintings to, and which painting does she give to whom? And then the next thing I had to figure out is, back in 1937, how does one get from Bombay to Europe? All right, so this is interesting. You could go the long way, which would take months and months, or you could go the short way, which was to take the RMS Viceroy from Bombay. This is a beautiful steamship. It had tennis courts and indoor swimming pool and ballrooms and lots of cigar rooms for the men, club chairs, that kind of thing. It was an incredible experience. And our nurse doesn't have the money to take something like this, to take the short trip, but I'll leave you to figure out how she does it. And so after this trip, after this steamship goes through the Suez Canal and lands at Istanbul, which is another place that I went to just to make sure that you guys experience that, then you take an Orient Express. And you guys, I'm crazy about Murder on the Orient Express. I love that book. I love the movie. I love anything about Agatha Christie. And so I have always wanted to research the Orient Express, and I got a chance to do it. And it turns out it wasn't just one Orient Express. There were about 6 of them, and they all went to different cities. So our nurse is taking the Orient Express to Prague, because this is where she's going to find the first person that she's looking for. Now, how do I do my research? Okay, I actually find people to help me. And before I ever leave on a trip, and this trip was about a month because I was spending a week in every single place I went to, I find academicians, I find interwar experts, art historians, photo archivists, and all these different places. And if one person that I find can't help me, then I always ask for a referral. I get another referral. Then another referral and a referral after that. And then I find these people and I make appointments with them and I meet them as I go along on my trip. So this is Martina, and she was somebody I had arranged an appointment with in Prague. She walked me around everywhere to show me where she thought my 2 characters would have gone, the deceased painter and then also the young nurse, like where they would have gone to in search of this or that or the other. Where's the British embassy? Where is the astronomical clock? That is so famous in Prague, and where the nurse has to go. So Martina, and my brother was just in Prague, and I put him in touch with Martina, so he had a chance to hang out with Martina, and she took him to a whole bunch of like museums, art museums, and stuff like that. She took me to exhibitions of 1930s furniture and clothing, which I needed in order to figure out, what people were wearing and how they were eating and so on. In Florence, I met up with Samuele, who had taken the train down from the University of Milan to meet me in Florence. And Samuele walked me around Florence and took me along the Via Tornabuoni, which he said absolutely my painter would have been on. And then told me something about Ferragamo, which I will share with you in a little while. And then the very last one, this is Ermelinda Campani. She has a great Italian name. I love that. I think I'm going to come back as Ermelinda Campani in my next life. But Ermelinda is the current director of the Stanford and Florence program, which I attended in 1978. So it was really fun to go back and to, sort of have a little nostalgic moment about all of that. And Ermelinda's family was very much aligned with Mussolini in the 1930s. Back when Mussolini was saying, I'm going to make Italy great again. And you know how he was going to do that is he was going to make sure that people only used ingredients that were found in Italy to make whatever product they were making. So yeah, sounds familiar. So Ferragamo realized that he was no longer going to be able to use the steel that shored up his stilettos. And, for Ferragamo, his stilettos were the mainstay of his business. So he thought, okay, I got to research some other materials. He found cork, and he realized he could make heels out of cork, but he had to make them platform shoes. So he made these platform cork wedge heels. and those became a really big part of a really big part of his business, and they became really famous with celebrities and movie stars. And if you watch any movies from the 1940s or 50s, you will notice that most of the women are wearing these cork wedge heels with the little peekaboo toes, in the front. Okay, so I also, when I research, I take a lot of notes and I fill up these little notebooks with all kinds of notes. And when I do that, no, don't worry. And when I do that, at the end of my trip, what I do is I go back and read all of my notes, and then I start highlighting things that I think would be interesting for you as readers, because they're interesting to me, to put in the story. And so here is when I start really winnowing down and isolating what I'm actually going to talk about in the story itself. This is one of the things that I found out. In 1937, there were a lot of families like Amrita's that came from Europe down to India. Why? Because India has never discriminated against the Jews. And Jewish people had been coming to India for over 2,000 years to be safe and to form communities where they were able to have kosher bakeries, kosher butcher shops. They were able to build their synagogues. In Mumbai today, there are 8 synagogues you can visit. And so this became an interesting sort of reason why Amrita's family had finally settled back down in India as opposed to being up in Europe during that interwar period. And when you go to the Pinkas synagogue, up on the second floor, you find all of these drawings by children. And you think, well, why are they displaying drawings by children? There was a young woman, apparently, who ended up going to the concentration camps along with 77,000 other Czech Jews. And in order to keep the children joyful, she scrounged around for every pen, pencil, chalk, whatever she could find, along with paper, and she would have the kids draw happier times like being with their grandparents, happier times like a birthday, or being with their friends, on the swing set or something like that. So I thought that is remarkable. Here's an unremarkable girl who did something so remarkable. I've got to put her in the book. So she's in the book. In 1937 in Paris, there was the World Expo. And this is the expo for which Picasso painted Guernica, one of his most famous paintings. And this was his protest against the bombing of a town in Catalonia by the fascists and the Nazis. And this was a kind of a reminder to me that oftentimes artists are the first ones to protest something through their art. Without having to say a word, they can do it, through their art. And I left the men in here just to show you how large this painting is. He worked on this for months and months. These are the Nardal sisters, and they were hugely popular in Paris. They ran these intellectual salons. They were from Martinique, and really fascinating women who were very well educated at the Sorbonne, and they really influenced the Negritude movement, which also made its way into the book. And then here is a sample of those cork wedge heels that I was telling you about that Ferragamo designed. Now these are embedded with pearls and rubies and emeralds, okay, just like all the shoes in my closet. But these were made for the Maharani of Kuch Behar. And she was, if you will remember, all the way back to the henna artist. The younger Maharani was a Maharani named Maharani Gayatri Devi. Gayatri Devi was the daughter of the woman whom these were commissioned for. Both those women, mother and daughter, were very much into fashion and the latest and greatest by designers. They're gorgeous shoes. So I think in closing, what I wanted to have you guys take away from 6 Days in Bombay is that as the nurse, and as I, in researching Amrita, go into all of these different lands and learn more and more about her background, I realize that our first impression of somebody can't be our last impression of somebody. That it takes a lot of different sides of someone to really understand exactly who they are. And this is, of course, a conclusion that our nurse comes to at the very end of her journey as she returns to Bombay. But I also want you to know that not only does she solve the mystery of her patient's death as she returns to Bombay, but she also solves the mystery of her own parentage, which was mixed, and it was a dual identity. She was half Indian and half British. And 300 years prior, when the British East India Company had come to India, they had encouraged alliances between Indian women and British employees of theirs, because this was what they felt would provide a bridge between the cultures and between the languages. And indeed, when the offspring of the Anglo-Indian people was formed, when the offspring came about, they became clerks in many of the administrative positions. They got really choice positions in the British Raj administration. So she, however, is one of the Anglo-Indians whose father did not just stay in India and take care of the family, nor did he take the family back to the UK and take care of them. He actually abandoned the family and went back to his first family in England, which happened a lot. And so she has not seen her father since she was 3 years old, and she needs some answers, and hopefully she is going to be able to get some answers by the end of her trip. So I really hope that you will enjoy 6 Days in Bombay. My editor keeps calling it my first standalone novel, but in reality, every single one of my books has been a standalone novel because I didn't know that I would write another one after it. So I always made them so that no matter which book you dive into, you can get a feeling for whatever happened before and whatever is going to happen next. So thank you so much for your attention. And I would love to get your questions about other things. Oh yeah. Let's okay. So let me give you a little bit of background. Thanks very much, Frida. So one of the things I always look forward to is how am I going to market this next book? It's fun for me to figure that out because for 30 years, that's what I did for a living, is marketing and advertising. So with this book, I thought, you know what I want to do? I want to bring 3 scenes to life in the book that you might find interesting, or that will take you into the time period and into the world of these people. And I thought, okay, I pulled 3 of the scenes out from the book. Then I went to ChatGPT and I said, would you turn this into screenplays? And within a minute, I had 3 screenplays in front of me. And then I found this fabulous writer-director named Radha Mehta. I wanted to work with South Asian women and work only with women on her crew. And so she had a crew of about 20 people she works with, cinematographers, ADs, all these other people. And so she took my screenplays, she made them much better because as a director, she knows how she wants it, to look and ultimately end up. And then she, in one day in Burbank at a studio, we filmed all 3 scenes. She had already done the table reads, she'd done the casting, everybody came on time. We were booked from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. that day, but we were done by 6 because she is so organized and so amazing. She put the work to music. And I would love for you guys, if you get a chance to see the whole set, you can see them on any of my socials. You can see it on my website, alkajoshi.com. And I hope you get a chance to do that. But this is the first one. Here's our patient.
Is that how you see me?
Yes?
If only you could see yourself the way I do.
Which of the paintings do you prefer, Sona?
Miss Novak, They're stunning.
100.5. A little high.
How's the pain?
Tolerable. As long as I keep my mind off it.
How are you, Mira?
Did you know Sona is the most splendid nurse?
Really? I've increased your dosage a little, which should help. I'm concerned about the lingering pain, so I'll have you see Dr. Holbrook.
You will see me before you leave tonight, right?
I make no promises, Mira.
Quite a catch, isn't he?
I'll check back soon.
It gives you an idea of how different the two personalities are, and just sort of gives you some of the dynamic that's going on between them. Okay, so now questions and answers, hopefully. Any kind of question is fine. You know, it's so easy. So if you're specific and you just say, take these passages and turn to screenplays of 1 to 2 minutes in length, boom, it'll do it. Yeah, it's frightening, but it's also great. Okay, so the question is, what made me decide to become an author, you know, at the age of 52, as opposed to the career that I had had before in advertising and marketing? Well, I had been going to India with my mother from 2008 to 2011. And at the same time, if you guys will recall, there was a huge global crisis in 2008, right? It was the mortgage crisis. A lot of people lost their homes, and you know, people lost their jobs. People started cutting back on work and all of that. And so my business was down, and I thought, well, what am I going to do for the next couple of years? Because I'm twiddling my thumbs. And my husband had always said, and of course I never listened to him, but he had always said, Alka, I think you could write fiction. I love the stories you tell me about growing up in India, and I have not heard those stories before. I wish that you would write those down. And I would always say, no, I'm a hack. I write PR, I write advertising. I'm not a literary writer. I'm not, no. And he would say, well, I think that you could. If you ever find yourself with some time, you should go take some classes and just perfect what you already know. So in 2008, I thought, well, what if the next year I go ahead and enroll, and I enroll in one of these 2-year programs, a Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing, and I learn how to write a novel. Like, that would be a good use of my time, and it'll be fun because I love to read, and you know, let's see what happens. During that time, I was going back and forth to India, and I knew exactly what I was going to write about is India. And I had not been to India in 36 years before that, because I think that it really affected me coming to this country in 1967. We landed in Ames, Iowa, which was where my father was getting his doctorate in civil engineering. My brothers and I were 9, 10, 11 years old. And it was a shock. First of all, the weather was a shock because we were used to the desert of Rajasthan, which is where we're from. And I would get the 30-degree, minus 30 degrees in the wintertime. It was freezing. And all of a sudden, we went from this very nice middle class existence that we had with my mom had a household staff. She never had to cook. And all of a sudden now we are in graduate student housing in Ames, Iowa. And the graduate student housing was Quonset huts from leftover from World War II that were military barracks. and they had turned them into very, very crude graduate student housing. So we had one oil heater in this 800 square foot place. And I shared one room with my brothers, and my parents had the other very tiny room, which was basically the bed. And, you know, we were all like in shock, like, what in the world are we doing here? Then we go to school, and in school, everybody is saying things to us like, you know, and keep in mind, this is the 1960s. It's not like it is now, and it's not like California. And so the kinds of things that we kept hearing were, oh, you're Indian. What tribe are you from? Oh, you're Indian. Why do you let cows run in the streets? Oh, you're Indian. Why do you let all those poor people starve? What's wrong with you? Why is your country in such shambles? Now, at 9 years old, I didn't know how to answer any of these questions, right? And the feeling that I got from all of this is, you know what? Nobody wants to go to India. It is a terrible place to be from, and I don't want to be from that place. And so I just, you know, came home one day and I said, Mom, I am no longer going to be Indian. I'm going to be American. I'm going to speak like an American. I'm going to eat like an American. I'm going to dress like an American. No more of those kurta pajamas and, you know, salwar kameez for me. And so my mom was so bewildered because she had just learned how to cook Indian food. And then all of a sudden she has to learn how to cook American food. And she was a vegetarian, so she had never cooked spaghettis and meatballs and you know, hamburgers and stuff. And so she's having to start making all those kinds of things. And you know, her American food was always a disaster. And my dad would take pity on us and take us to McDonald's next door. Um, but you know, it was just it was being an Indian was not something I was taking pride in at all. And so when I started going back with my mom, it was because my younger brother had bought a flat in Jaipur, which is where our extended family still lives. And he said, hey, you guys, anybody who wants to go, you should go. My mom, who was in her 70s, said, I would like to reconnect with friends and family, so I'd like to go. Alka, why don't you take me? So I went back with my mom, and I was shown my mother's India. And she was showing me all the beautiful saris. She's showing me, taking me to the jewelry bazaar. She's showing me the jewelry. And you know, the back room, which I mentioned in The Secret Keeper of Jaipur, the back room where the good stuff really is sold to, you know, wealthy families. And and she is showing me the fruits and vegetables that she can't get in the United States. And I just had a sense of, I said, Mom, did you not want to go to the United States? She goes, oh, I never wanted to go to the United States. That was your father's dream. It was never my dream. That wasn't like this golden land of opportunity for me. She said I had to like start cleaning and cooking and scrubbing. And, you know, I wasn't used to any of that. And also, I just love India. I just love the spices and, you know, all of these kinds of things. I love the food better here. And then she also started telling me about her life. That when she was 18, she wanted to continue going to college. She wanted to get her degree in psychology. And she didn't have that choice because her father said, oh, you need to come home now. We found this young engineer. He's very ambitious. And we are, you know, you'll be married in a month. And so my mother came home and she was married. And then within 4 years, she has 3 small children. And her life is just never her own. And so she didn't get to go back to school. She didn't get to have a career. She didn't get to do any of that stuff. And, you know, I notice, you know, South Asians in this room, but you're from a different generation of people who actually had more leeway to do a lot of that kind of stuff, but my mother did not. So I just thought, well, it's amazing that my mother has had this very restricted life, but she has raised me to be so independent. Like with me, she always said, honey, date whomever you want. You're 18 years old. Let me go get you some birth control pills. And that way we know that you're not going to get pregnant. My mom did that. And she said, okay, you know, marry whomever you want. I am not going to get in the way of that. Get whatever degree you want. Go to whichever university you want. I am not going to make you be a doctor or a lawyer or a software engineer. I'm not going to make you do that. You can be whatever you want to be, but you have to make sure that you can survive on your own, you can support yourself, you can pay your bills. That's the most important thing in life, because then as a woman, you get to decide your future. And I knew she was speaking from the point of view of somebody who hadn't had that. So I thought, oh God, I wish I could change my mom's life for her. But I can't do that. None of us can do that for someone else. But what I could do is in fiction, I could create a character like Lakshmi, who looks just like my mother. My mother had green eyes. I have blue eyes. My younger brother has green eyes. So Lakshmi, Radha, and baby Nikki all have these watercolor eyes. And then I said, okay, I'm going to make this woman be able to keep herself child free. So then I had to look up and see how would a woman in 1955 India keep herself child free. And then I'm going to make sure that she leaves her marriage after 2 years because it's not serving her. And then I thought, okay, why would a woman leave her marriage at that time? Well, if her life is threatened, if she's physically in danger, then she might leave. So that's where this mean guy Hari came in. And then I thought, okay, so now she needs to go to another city because she has to reinvent herself, and nobody from her past can find her, because if they did, they would drag her back to her family, they would drag her back to her husband, and so on. And so she goes to Jaipur and she invents this life as a henna artist and an herbal healer. Why? Because any South Asian woman knows about henna. She's probably had that done on her hands and feet and watched other women do it her whole life. And so this, if she has any modicum of artistic talent, she'll be able to do henna. So she can do henna. And then because all South Asian families have these herbal like concoctions and remedies and things like that that they use to make their health better, my mother had a whole bunch of those. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to give Lakshmi even more of those that she can help cure other people's ills with. So that is how the character of Lakshmi came about. And so, I told my mom, I said, Mom, I'm writing this book for you. This is a tribute to you. And my mom said, oh, that's nice, honey. Thank you. So no. So what happened is that shortly after I got my degree, and I was able to talk about my book in an audience. My mother was present, and I, had her stand up and take a bow. But about 8 months after that, I was taking my mom to a lot of doctors, and then hospital, and then hospice, and my mother died very quickly, very unexpectedly. And so she never got to see the sort of, the trilogy. She never got to see this fourth book. And but I was keynoting in Santa Fe, and a woman came up to me at the end and she said, okay, now don't think I'm kind of crazy or anything, but I saw your mother standing 6 feet behind you, and she was wearing a gold sari, and she was talking to you in your language. And I was like, I'm sure she saw that. I don't have those kind of premonitions, but how nice of her to tell me that that's what she saw. So maybe my mom is always with me, right? Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, you guys, that first book took 10 years to make, 10 years. And I was so mad at my, first I was mad that nobody would say it was ready to be published after I got my MFA. Mm-hmm. Nobody would say that. And then when Mom died, then I stopped writing. But then one of my thesis advisors called and she said, I really would like for you to start writing again. So I worked with her for the next year and a half, and she sent the manuscript off that we had been working on to her agent. Then her agent called me from New York and said, this is Emma Sweeney. I love this book. I really want to work with you on it. And I said, now I'm getting published. And she said, no, you're not getting published because you have so much work to do on this novel. So I said, wow, now what? And so that's when she said, okay, cut out every other chapter, make Malik much smaller part of the story, make Radha a smaller part of the story. You don't need all of this epilogue at the end where you've got 10 years on and what these characters are doing. Cut all that stuff out. So I had to cut all that stuff out and then start over again with directions that she was giving me. 3 years go by. She and I are working back and forth on it. And honestly, I think she forgot about me in between every revision. But I would just be so persistent. And so then finally, she says, "Okay, listen, Alka, you have gone as far as I can take you, but now you need really sharp independent editors to go the rest of the way. And I said, oh my God, I thought you were my editor. That's how naive I was. And she goes, I'm just an agent. I'm just helping you because I love the novel, but you really need some, professionals to take you to the finish line. She said, you're close, but you're not there yet, and I'm not going to release the novel just yet. So I said, okay. So she gave me a list, and I called one person on the list. And so I sent her my novel. She looked at it, and she said, okay, so I love this novel. I love this character, but here are 12 pages of things that I think you should consider or think about. And I thought, no, that's not what I want to hear. So I'm going to call somebody else on the list. So I contacted somebody else, and I sent her my story. And she looked it over, and she said, oh, I love this story. I love this character. This is fabulous. Here are 18 pages of things that I think you should, think about or do differently. And at that point, I just lost it. I just thought, no, this is ridiculous. I have been at this now for 7 years total. And I just think this is never, ever going to happen. I quit. This is a racket. So, and of course, as soon as the recession was over, I was getting all these calls, and I was actually doing all my marketing and advertising work in between doing all these revisions. So I just thought, I'm just going to do my advertising and marketing. And I was really mad at my husband at the time, because I was like, you got me into this, and you got my hopes up so high, and now it's never going to happen. And then a year later, I was looking for something in my desk drawer, and I ran across this novel. I opened up the drawer. Here's this big, thick manuscript, and it has all of those pages from the professional editor's paperclip to it. And I thought, oh, Alka, if you don't read all of these, if you don't do something about this, then chances are nobody will get to see this alternate life you created for your mother. So just suck it up. Just suck it up. Just see if you can do something with this. So I started. Reluctantly, I started. It took me a year to get the whole novel and the changes that they had suggested. And then I finally sent it all back to Emma. Emma, it's been 9 years since I first started working on this novel. I really need for you to send this off to somebody, please. And that's when she sent it off to HarperCollins. And she said, okay, so we're going to wait. And here's the thing. I bet we're going to get a second book contract or a third book contract or a fourth book contract out of this, because I think you're at a point now where they can really shape it to sell. So she was right. So within a couple of months, we had our contract with HarperCollins, and then I have a new editor, Kathy, and Kathy's going to work with me for the next year on the novel with changes that she wants to make. So then I have to make Kathy's changes, and then after that year, then she sent it off to the printer, and that was when Malik starts knocking at my head. So that. It's a long trajectory, you guys. So a lot of times people say, wow, it seems like you're like an overnight success. You guys, there's no such thing as an overnight success. It always takes as long as it's going to take. And you have to have three things. You have to have passion for your subject matter if you're going to write anything, right? And it was so important for me to get this story out about my mom. And then you have to be persistent, because persistence really does pay, as the saying goes. And even when you think all is lost, you just have to keep going. Sometimes you have to take time off, like I did. You have to take time off and recharge. And then I think the third part of the three P's that I think you need is patience. You have to have patience with yourself, because you can't get it right the first time. Remember that no matter what it is you're good at, whether it's knitting, whether it's taking care of babies, whether it's driving, whatever it is, it takes a lot of hours to get good at it. And so it's the same thing with writing. You cannot, become a perfect writer after 4 classes. It just doesn't happen. You have to keep doing revision after revision, because writing is really about rewriting and finding the kernel of truth in whatever it is you are working on. Okay, another question. Oh no, I'm sorry. I talked
okay.
for so long.
Now I better understand where Lakshmi comes in.
Yeah.
But your women characters are very strong, independent, but also vulnerable. So do you have like role models where you get inspiration from?
Well, I think that we as women are all very strong. I think we're stronger than we think we are. Because I think that, I mean, come on, a period every month. I mean, what man could sustain that, you guys? No offense, sir. No offense. But I do think that women are far stronger than men are. In so many different ways, right? It's not that we don't need each other, but I think women can really hold things together in a way that maybe the other gender cannot. But I also think that women are vulnerable, and they're okay being vulnerable. I think that it's okay for women to say, "I need help. I can't figure this out by myself." Because I mean, if you think about it, that book took 14 people to write, right? They were all my instructors in my program. There was my agent. There was my husband. My husband did a lot of looking over my drafts and helping me because he's also a writer. I forgot to tell you guys that. So he's a writer. And so when he said, "Honey, I think really you can write," because he went to the Stanford, writing program. And I should have listened to him, of course, but I didn't. But all the editors who worked on it, everybody who worked on my book made it better. And I think that's perfectly okay. I think it's okay to say, "I need your help making this better. I need your help making this happen," whatever it is. And I think that we women are stronger because we're vulnerable, because we can allow a lot of other people to help us. Don't you guys agree? Yeah, we are strong. Can I take one more? Okay, one more question. Those two. Thanks. I think that there are but the other thing is that people keep asking me after they read The Perfumist of Paris, "Could you please that just is that next generation?" So, girls. So I think that is going to be. So that'll take me into 1980 or so. So a little more contemporary. Oh. Excellent. February of 2027. And I don't have a title yet because you guys, they're going to have to title it. I thought that with the taxonomy that they have now, right? The henna artist, the perfumist of Paris, the secret keeper of Jaipur, I thought that they were going to call it the painter. And so that's what I'd been calling it on the manuscript. But no, then they came up with 6 Days in Bombay. And I was like, okay, I like that too. I think that's fine. Yeah. They probably asked ChatGPT to give them all those titles.